When the gilded doors of Westminster opened and William and Catherine stepped forward not as heirs, but as sovereigns, the world froze. No announcement, no warning, no Charles. Just the radiant pair cloaked in destiny. What happened behind palace walls that led to this seismic moment? The monarchy didn't just shift, it detonated. And the first clues were buried deep in a royal silence that grew too loud to ignore. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The image alone was enough to send shockwaves through every corner of the globe. Catherine, draped in a striking ensemble that defied both tradition and expectation, radiated power. Not just elegance, but strength. Her gown bore deliberate echoes of historical queens, yet with bold modern flourishes that screamed a new era had arrived. And it was not asking for permission. William, by her side, wore a crown that once seemed a decade away, his jaw clenched, eyes blazing not with triumph but with something darker. There was fire in his gaze, not celebration. A fire born not of joy, but of conflict. A fire that said this wasn't the plan, but it had to be done, as the cameras scrambled to capture every second of this unprecedented coronation. One haunting question loomed over the moment like a shadow. Where was King Charles? The man who only recently ascended the throne was nowhere to be seen. Not in the cathedral, not on the balcony, not even in the palace windows. His absence was deafening. Rumors erupted within minutes. Had he abdicated? Fallen ill? Been removed? Social media erupted into chaos while news anchors stumbled through speculative reports. But the silence from the palace? That was the loudest statement of all. The questions only deepened when hours later, a grainy video surfaced online. Paparazzi footage captured Queen Camilla disheveled, distraught and flanked by aides exiting a private London hospital just days before the coronation. The scene was frantic. She was seen shouting into a phone, shielding her face, and refusing to answer any question. Analysts and insiders pored over every frame of the footage, trying to decode what had happened behind those heavily guarded walls. But what the footage showed most clearly was fear. And then came the dissection. Every second of William and Catherine's arrival was analyzed, magnified, and replayed. Body language experts filled the airwaves with interpretations. Catherine's posture, not deferential but deliberate. William's expression, not relaxed but resolved. Their every movement seemed rehearsed, but not for celebration, for confrontation. There was nothing ceremonial in their stride. This was not a peaceful coronation. This was a takeover. A line had been crossed, and still the online divide deepened. Some declared it the rebirth of the monarchy, young blood, modern ideals, the future finally stepping in. Others called it betrayal, a coup. In royal robes, the legitimacy of their rise was already being questioned, dissected, and weaponized in digital war zones across the globe. Was this planned all along? Were we watching destiny or rebellion? But the shock of their appearance was just the beginning. The real story, the betrayal, the cover-up, the secret handover was buried beneath layers of deception. Where is King Charles? The man crowned barely months ago, gone without a trace. No farewell address, no abdication speech, just a ghostly silence echoing through Buckingham's halls. Some say illness, others whisper treason, but one fact remains. The monarchy doesn't vanish without blood in the water. Last time the public saw Charles, his face looked different, tense, pale, distracted. He moved through the ceremonial proceedings of a state visit with the robotic stiffness of a man carrying a secret too heavy to bear. Cameras captured his stiff handshakes, his eyes darting, lips pressed shut in visible restraint. The palace's official line was that he was tired, but those who've studied royal history know that tired is the monarchy's oldest lie. What followed that appearance was an eerie silence. Events were quietly cancelled, public engagements postponed, and when questions mounted, Buckingham offered only vagueness, citing private matters and requesting respect for the king's privacy. But respect quickly gave way to suspicion. Behind the palace walls, resignations surged. Long-trusted aides, many with decades of service, submitted abrupt notices. One royal chef, known for his discretion, was spotted leaving the palace in tears. Another source claimed royal security had shifted focus entirely away from Charles's residence. Something was unraveling. Something big. Then came the whispers, hushed conversations in elite circles, murmurs in Westminster, that King Charles had been diagnosed with a severe, possibly terminal condition. But rather than reveal it publicly, the monarchy had chosen secrecy, citing fears of national destabilization. Yet, even that explanation didn't account for the speed, the ruthlessness with which the crown changed hands. The leaks began small snippets from anonymous insiders, but then a classified document surfaced on the dark web, a signed relinquishment order, allegedly bearing Charles's royal seal. A document, if authentic, invoked a clause buried deep within royal succession law. A clause so obscure most scholars dismissed it as ceremonial. It allows for the emergency transfer of power without public notice in situations deemed threatening to the crown's continuity. The clause had never been used before. Until now, and then the audio clip. Camilla, angry, broken, her voice cracking with disbelief. They've stolen everything from him, she cried, in what insiders say was a phone call intercepted by intelligence services. The authenticity of the recording was never confirmed, but it spread like wildfire. Every word sounded like a dagger. If this was medical crisis, why did Camilla sound like a queen betrayed, not bereaved? Why did her fury sound political, not personal? The deeper the public looked, the murkier the waters became. Reports began circulating of MI5 involvement in securing palace records. Royal correspondence vanished from broadcasts. And most telling of all, Parliament remained silent. Not a single MP demanded answers. It was as if a veil had been dropped across the entire British state. A coordinated quiet, and through it all, William remained composed, cold, controlled, as if he had been preparing for this moment all along. As if the storm that removed his father was one he saw coming, or worse, one he helped shape as Charles disappeared into silence. A new storm was building, one that would force William to choose between blood and duty. For years, William walked the line dutiful son, silent heir, loyal subject. But loyalty has limits. Behind palace curtains, whispers of betrayal and exploitation tore at his resolve. And when a private recording revealed Charles's shocking plan for the crown, William snapped. The pressure had always been there, groomed from birth, raised in the shadow of legacy, shaped into an emblem of composure. But beneath that polished exterior, William carried decades of silent rage. Rage at being sidelined, delayed, disciplined into submission. For years, he had endured, believing his time would come, trusting that the system built around him would hold its promises. But that trust began to crack in private moments. Hushed conversations abruptly ended when he entered a room. Papers that disappeared after he'd asked for them. Advisors who now bowed lower to his father than ever before. Something had shifted, and William felt it like a tremor in his bones. Then came the confrontation. Sources describe a volcanic argument behind closed doors, one so fierce it was heard by more than a few members of palace staff. William, furious and unfiltered, finally demanding answers. Charles, cornered, offered none. Only silence. A silence that, according to one insider, spoke louder than any denial ever could. Days later, the truth came not in words but in whispers. A leaked audio file, low quality, but unmistakable. A conversation between two senior palace figures discussing a strategy to bypass William entirely. The plan: Charles would name another successor, one who wouldn't fight, one who wouldn't question the system. Not even in the country. Harry, the name alone reopened wounds William had spent years trying to bury. His brother's absence wasn't just personal, it was political. When Harry walked away from royal life, it shattered more than tradition. It fractured the very chain of trust that had once held the family together. And now, the man who'd abandoned the crown was being considered for it. William was livid, betrayed not just as a son, but as a future king already written out of the script. He turned to the one person who had always seen past the crown, past the protocol, to the man underneath. Catherine. In a rare moment of vulnerability, William broke. "They're trying to erase me," he said, his voice heavy, eyes clouded. And for the first time, Catherine didn't offer comfort. She offered clarity. Because she had seen it too, the meetings he was no longer invited to, the letters he was never shown, the decisions being made without him. She had warned him gently at first. Now she was resolute. "If you let this happen, there's no coming back," she told him. "Not for you, not for our children, not for the future of this monarchy." It wasn't rage that made him decide. It was resolve, the realization that silence would no longer protect him. That obedience had become a weapon used against him, and that waiting his turn was no longer a virtue, it was a trap. So the crown tilted not through ceremony, but through confrontation. And by Catherine's side, William made a decision that would change royal history forever. She was never meant to rule, not by blood, not by law. Yet there she stood crowned, commanding and unbreakable. But Catherine's rise was no fairy tale. It was forged in fire through betrayal, sacrifice, and a final ultimatum that left the firm gasping. From the moment she entered the royal orbit, Catherine had been cast in the role of the dutiful consort, polished, composed, agreeable, never the center, always the support. But behind that serenity was a woman learning the mechanics of power in real time. Every event, every snub, Every whispered insult was a lesson. She studied the game not as a guest, but as a future player. Yet no one, least of all the monarchy itself, imagined she would one day seize the board. Catherine's transformation wasn't sudden. It was methodical, quiet, intentional. She didn't push her way to the front. The institution backed itself into a corner until there was no one else left to lead it out. Even during the chaos that surrounded Charles's vanishing act, Catherine remained silent, not because she was uncertain, but because silence was her weapon. Unbeknownst to the public, she had been battling more than just the crumbling monarchy. She had faced health challenges the palace worked furiously to conceal. It would have been easier to retreat, to let the burden fall elsewhere, but Catherine didn't retreat. She recalibrated. Behind closed doors, she was engaging with legal advisors, pushing boundaries the firm swore were immovable. She wasn't asking for permission. She was drafting blueprints for a new monarchy, one that reflected strength, stability, and her children's future. Then came the moment that changed everything. The moment she walked into that room, flanked not by staff, but by resolve, and issued the word. That would reverberate through history. We step forward now, or the monarchy dies with them. It wasn't a plea. It was an ultimatum. There was no more time for tradition, no more room for hesitation. William had made his choice, but it was Catherine who ceded the crown's hand, while much of the aristocracy recoiled furious that a commoner had risen to command the institution they believed belonged to them. The public roared in support. Social media was ablaze with admiration. Women around the world saw not just a queen, but a warrior cloaked in grace. She wasn't born to rule, but she had earned every inch of the throne she now occupied. Still, within the golden walls of the palace, acceptance was scarce. Daggered glances, muted greetings. Allies who had once courted her charm now whispered behind locked doors. But Catherine was unmoved. She had made peace with being loved by the people and loathed by the powerful. What truly anchored her resolve, however, was never her title. It was her children, their faces, their future. What legacy would they inherit? What history would they be forced to carry? Catherine didn't just rise for herself, she rose, so they wouldn't have to crawl. So they wouldn't be forced to navigate the same minefield of deception, denial, and quiet sacrifice. In protecting them, she was rewriting what monarchy could mean. But no throne comes without enemies, and the reaction from within. The palace would unleash the most dangerous royal fracture since Edward VIII. The crown united a nation but split a family. As William and Catherine assumed power, not all royals stood behind them. In fact, some were already plotting their downfall. Welcome to the war room of aristocratic vengeance. What unfolded after their coronation wasn't just backlash, it was insurrection disguised as tradition. The first and fiercest resistance came from within. Princess Anne, the hardened stalwart of royal duty, was livid. Her disdain was not whispered, it was weaponized. She allegedly cornered William in a private corridor and delivered words that would ripple through the entire family. This is not your crown to take. It wasn't about legacy, she insisted. It was about order. In her eyes, William's rise was not earned, it was stolen. That declaration of war didn't require an army. It just needed old blood and cold ambition. Prince Edward and Sophie found themselves trapped between shifting tectonic plates. On one side, the new monarchy. On the other, the remnants of a collapsing old guard. Their public silence masked a brutal private tug-of-war, one that fractured friendship, shattered alliances, and forced them to choose between relevance and principle. Edward, always cautious, leaned toward William. Sophie, wounded by Catherine's sudden rise, hesitated. Their home became a war zone of whispers, where loyalty was currency and neutrality was treason. Meanwhile, security agencies intercepted communications, emails, texts, even encrypted calls linking former palace staffers to anti-monarchist networks. Disgraced ex-employees, cast out during the transition, were allegedly feeding intelligence to groups actively working to undermine the royal institution. These weren't fringe activists. They were insiders. People, WHO had once poured the Queen's tea, managed the press, walked the dogs. Now they were the enemy. Some wanted justice, others wanted revenge. And a few, a throne-shaped vacuum. They hoped to collapse from within, even further on the periphery of the Queen's distant cousin. Once seen only during balcony appearances and state dinners, began distancing themselves from the new regime. They declined invites, delayed RSVPs, offered vague, almost passive-aggressive statements to the press. They weren't loyalists anymore. They were ghosts drifting away from a monarchy they no longer recognized, but perhaps the most dangerous attack didn't come from within palace gates, but from the headlines. A rogue press campaign, seeded across tabloid media and elite journals alike, began chipping away at Catherine's image. Anonymous sources, dubious timelines, and old scandals were resurrected and reframed with surgical cruelty. Stories questioning her mental state, her ambitions, even her marriage, none of them stuck, but all of them stung. Because the goal wasn't to destroy, it was to exhaust, to erode, to make the new queen doubt herself from the inside out. The situation escalated to the point that MI6's most elite intelligence arm was formally briefed on a potential threat originating from within the family. No names were printed, but everyone knew, because what began as a symbolic rebellion was now an operational risk. It wasn't just about legacy anymore. It was about survival, and as P. Richaud mounted at home, a new battlefield emerged, one where diplomacy, not blood, would determine the fate of the crown. In a single day, the British monarchy rebooted itself, and the planet took notice. From stunned headlines in New York to protests in the Caribbean, William and Catherine's rise sent shockwaves into every corner of the Commonwealth, and not all was celebratory. The Western press reacted first, with breathless urgency. Major American networks abandoned scheduled programming to cover the coronation that no one saw coming. Headlines screamed phrases like royal coup and unprecedented power shift, while cable pundits speculated live on air, struggling to explain a monarchy that had rewritten its own rules. Hollywood's elite, many of whom had once allied themselves with Meghan and Harry's narrative of royal exile, reacted with visible tension. Some voiced quiet admiration for William and Catherine's poise. Others, especially those with private ties to the Sussexes, accused the palace of orchestrated propaganda. Social media lit up with memes, outrage, celebration, and confusion, a global tug-of-war of perception playing out in real time. In Australia, the fallout was swift and political. Within hours, the Prime Minister called for an urgent constitutional review, reigniting the Republican debate that had long simmered beneath the surface. "This monarchy is not the one we pledged allegiance to," he declared in Parliament, his voice laced with defiance. Polls, owed a nation divided, not just along political lines, but generational ones. The younger population, disillusioned, restless, and skeptical, began organizing protests, demanding a referendum. For them, this royal transformation wasn't a breath of fresh air. It was a final excuse to cut ties. Caribbean nations were even more direct. Barbados had already taken the leap into full independence. Now Jamaica, Belize, and St. Vincent began formal discussions to follow. Leaders called the event a wake-up call, criticizing the monarchy's inability to consult its own territories before unveiling a seismic shift in leadership. The symbolism of a crown choosing its rulers without consensus echoed too loudly. In places still haunted by colonial scars in Europe, the response was easier. While some royal households issued brief statements of congratulations, the tone was unmistakably cold. Spain sent a generic diplomatic note. The Dutch palace remained silent, and the Norwegians, usually neutral in all royal affairs, chose to cancel a previously planned joint event. Behind the scenes, royal protocol officers scrambled to contain the embarrassment of being blindsided. It wasn't just a matter of pride, it was a breach of trust. Then came the diplomatic cables. Leaked documents revealed a flurry of confusion in the hours following William and Catherine's appearance. Ambassadors were left scrambling without guidance. One cable, marked highly confidential, read, "This was not coordinated with allies. Repercussions inevitable." Another ominously warned of regional destabilization triggered by symbolic power shifts, a subtle but clear reference to the monarchy's ability to influence global sentiment through perception alone. The ripple effect was no longer metaphorical. It was geopolitical. Even the United Nations took note. Advisors briefed the Secretary-General on the potential ramifications, flagging the abrupt transition as a case study in soft power disruption. It wasn't war. It wasn't invasion. But it was upheaval, and in a world already teetering on instability, the transformation of the British monarchy wasn't just news, it was a global event that demanded explanation, reaction, and reckoning. But as the world speculated, and the palace simmered, a single broadcast changed everything, revealing the truth William never intended to share. It was meant to be ceremonial. Instead, it was a confession. William took the microphone and detonated decades of silence. What he revealed about his father, the royal machine, and his own guilt would forever redefine the monarchy. The room had been braced for tradition. A polished, practiced speech, smiles, nods, and vague promises of continuity. But what unfolded instead was raw, shocking, and utterly human. Just hours before the broadcast, an untelevised rehearsal of William's speech leaked to the press. Captured by a rogue staffer, the footage revealed a man unraveling. No crown, No audience, just William alone with his woe. Arduous, visibly shaken, whispering lines he couldn't quite bring himself to believe. "I don't know if this is right," he muttered, his voice cracking. "I don't know if I'm ready." The leak spread like wildfire, reframing expectation. By the time the live address aired, the world wasn't just watching, they were waiting to see if he'd break. He didn't. But what he did do was worse for the firm. He dismantled the illusion of stability that the monarchy had spent centuries cultivating. "I was born to be silent," William began, his voice low and steady, "but silence has broken us." The words hit like thunder. This wasn't royal rhetoric, this was a reckoning. He went on to speak, candidly and without embellishment, about the hidden reality behind the palace gates. He confirmed what had only been whispered in tabloids, that his father, Charles, had been deeply unwell, not just physically, but mentally. Isolated, paranoid, deteriorating, shielded by a royal apparatus that refused to act until it was too late. He was not abandoned, William said, but he was not helped. And that is a stain I carry, whether I want to or not. And then came the moment that changed everything. He admitted the truth, that the transition had not been peaceful, that it had not been democratic, that it had been necessary. "We took the crown," he confessed, "to protect the nation from a monarchy that lost its soul." No euphemisms, no poetic spin, just a clean break from the age of pageantry. For the first time, a monarch looked the world in the eye and admitted the system had failed. Beside him, Catherine's composure wavered. The camera caught her wiping a tear, subtle but unmistakable. It wasn't sadness, it was release. The weight of the secret they had both carried, finally exposed under the glare of global judgment. And what followed wasn't unity. It was a tidal wave of emotion. Some viewers wept, others raged. The public split down the middle between those who hailed William as a brave reformer and those who called him a traitor cloaked in royal robes. Newspapers ran dual headlines the next morning, the honest king and the crown's assassin. For the monarchy, the speech was nuclear. Courtiers resigned, advisers clashed, Parliament convened behind closed doors, diplomats drafted emergency protocols. The firm had always relied on its mystique, its ability to operate without scrutiny. But now, that curtain had been ripped away, and all that remained was one man, his guilt, and the truth he refused to hide. But not everyone believed the words were sincere, and one figure emerged, forgotten by some, feared by others, ready to take the crown by force. He left as a rebel. He returns as a wild card. Prince Harry's sudden landing at Heathrow, mere hours after the coronation, wasn't just coincidence. It was a challenge, because in his hands was something that could end it all. The CCTV footage was leaked before the palace could bury it. Grainy, time-stamped, and danning Prince Harry, head down, walking briskly through a private terminal with a small entourage and a black briefcase handcuffed to a bodyguard. No Meghan, no statement, just silence wrapped in thunder. His return wasn't announced, and it certainly wasn't welcomed. But the symbolism was clear. Harry wasn't coming home to celebrate. He was coming to confront. Whispers from inside the airport said royal security had been caught off guard, and by the time the press caught wind, the convoy had already vanished into the Scottish Highlands. By nightfall, Balmoral was under siege, not by protesters, but by questions. What was Harry doing there? Why had he demanded a meeting with the elder royals? And more importantly, what was in the briefcase? Sources close to the late King Charles's estate began to leak rumors of a sealed document, an inheritance clause that had been buried for years, protected by law and secrecy. The clause, they said, had one condition. If the monarchy ever fractured beyond repair, Harry would be named interim regent, holding the crown until stability was restored. No one could confirm its authenticity, but no one denied it either. And suddenly, the rebel son held the one thing more powerful than approval, a royal loophole. And then came the silence around Meghan. Her absence was louder than any speech. Some framed it as a quiet protest. Others called it a strategic retreat. But the message was unmistakable. This wasn't a Sussex return. This was Harry alone, unfiltered, unpredictable. The world watched, breath held, as the brothers finally came face to face behind palace walls. And what erupted wasn't reconciliation. It was a reckoning. The confrontation was brief, but explosive. "You betrayed him first," Harry is said to have spat. "You left us no choice," William replied, his voice like stone. Years of bitterness boiled over in seconds. No handshakes, no apologies, just two futures standing at war in the same bloodline. Behind the scenes, aides scrambled to determine whether Harry's claim to the clause could be enforced. Lawyers were consulted. Old wills were reviewed. And while the monarchy's official line remained one of unity, insiders reported panic, because Harry wasn't bluffing, and if he pressed forward, he wouldn't just reshape the crown. he could erase its current bearers entirely. Public sentiment swayed wildly, some begged for a reunion, others demanded the clause be destroyed. But Harry said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence alone had detonated the fragile calm William and Catherine had built. As battle lines deepened and the royal narrative frayed, one final chapter remained, one no one could have foreseen. With the crown reclaimed, the monarchy reborn, and the family shattered, Britain faces a future built on secrets. Was this the rebirth of a modern kingdom, or the quiet death of an empire wearing a mask of unity? The truth is, not even Willie and Catherine know what happens next. Her voice echoed across a nation that had waited weeks for a sign. Catherine, now queen in name and burden, stood behind a lectern and delivered her first public address. It was everything the monarchy needed: elegant, composed, and measured, but everything the public feared: calculated, symbolic, distant. She spoke of duty, of service, of preserving a heritage that binds us together, but she never uttered the name of her father-in-law, not once, not even in passing. Analysts dissected every syllable. Was this erasure, or a quiet nod to a past that no longer fit the crown's narrative? There was warmth in her delivery, but it was the warmth of a torch, bright but burning. Gone was the woman once hailed as the people's princess in waiting. In her place stood something colder, sharper, necessary. Meanwhile, William disappeared from London. No statements, no fanfare, just a single photograph snapped by a lone traveller showing him standing alone outside Charles's last known retreat in Wales. A cottage wrapped in fog and time, no guards, no entourage, just a son returning to the echo of a father's memory. What passed between those walls remains unknown, but insiders claim William stayed there for hours, emerging only once to retrieve something from a private study. A sealed envelope, reportedly left behind by Charles himself. The contents? Still unrevealed. But those close to William say his expression shifted after that day, less resolved, or conflicted. Whatever was inside, it didn't bring closure. It opened a door to a past he had tried to bury beneath a crown. Back in Westminster, the ground was already shifting. The public, once mesmerized by the spectacle of change, now demanded substance. Protesters gathered outside Parliament, waving placards that read "Crowned, but not chosen." Petitions surged for a national referendum to redefine or dismantle the monarchy altogether. Political leaders, once deferential, now saw opportunity. The crown had weathered scandal, rebellion, and transition, but could it survive reform? The calls grew louder, and Catherine's silence, in response, only added fuel to the fire. She had made a statement by not responding. But was it strength or fear? Inside the palace, the next chapter was already stirring. Prince George, barely a teenager, had begun shadowing his father, walking 3 steps behind, observing, listening, mimicking. Those close to the family whispered that he was already being shaped, trained for a role he had not yet questioned. One palace aide was overheard saying, "He's got the look already. Same stance, same smile." But no child should carry that weight this early. And yet, that he was standing still at official ceremonies, reciting lines with perfect poise. But behind that precision, there was something else. A flicker of unease, a quiet suggestion that even he knew what had been sacrificed for the crown to survive. And then came the twist. A private courier delivered a small box to Kensington Palace. Inside, the letter William had taken from Charles's retreat, along with instructions written in Charles's handwriting. To be opened upon the boy's first speech, it read. The boy, George. The implications were immediate and terrifying. What secret had Charles tied to the future? What truth had he buried so deep that even death couldn't silence it? The envelope remains sealed, locked inside a private vault. And while no one knows what it says, everyone feels its weight, because it doesn't just threaten to rewrite the past. It threatens to decide the future, and so Britain waits. The world watches, and the crown, though shining, trembles. What began as a bold transition has become something more complicated, more dangerous. This is no longer just about one reign. It is about what comes after, and whether the monarchy, reborn in secrecy and conflict, can survive its own evolution. The monarchy has always promised continuity, but this time, continuity came with a cost. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.